is still fighting for this title, and he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
I would love it if we beat them. Love it. It wasn't a tactic. It wasn't a headline. It was something breaking. The pressure, the pride, the principle. All cracking in real time, live on television. Because Kevin Keegan didn't play games. Not on the pitch, not in the press room. Not behind closed doors. He was made of effort and loyalty. He believed in what was earned, not gifted. And when someone crossed that belief, he remembered. Not with silence, not with revenge, but with something stronger. A fire that never went out. There are 5 names that still burn in that fire. 5 men who disrespected him, challenged him, humiliated him, and never made it right. Some of them wore suits, some wore armbands, some just wore the wrong smirk at the wrong time. This isn't a list, it's a record. The 5 men Kevin Keegan could never forgive, in football or in life. And if you still believe that loyalty matters more than politics, if you still respect the kind of fire that doesn't fade to silence, then stay, subscribe. Because this one isn't about fame, it's about principle, and the price a man pays to keep it. Before the rage, before the exits, before the boardrooms and betrayals, there was glory. Kevin Keegan didn't just play the game, he electrified it. He came from Scunthorpe with boots full of mud and lungs full of fight. Not the most talented, not the most elegant, but he ran harder, worked longer, made himself undeniable. At Liverpool, he became the engine of a dynasty. 3 league titles, a European Cup. He didn't just lift trophies, he made teams believe. In Hamburg, they called him Der Superstar, the Englishman who conquered Germany, Ballon d'Or, twice. Back when that still meant everything. And when he returned to England, he didn't pick safety. He picked resurrection. Newcastle, a sleeping giant. He woke them with football that felt like jazz in motion. No tactics, no fear, just fire. But the more he gave the game, the more the game took back. He believed in trust, in honesty, in respect, and that made him a target for men who didn't. Because in modern football, integrity doesn't get you promoted. It gets you punished. And behind the medals and applause, 5 names were waiting to take everything he'd built and try to break him. It began with white kits and cold stares. Wembley, 1974, Liverpool versus Leeds. And a match that was supposed to set the tone for the season turned into war. Keegan was a player of movement and precision. Bremner was the opposite. Sharp elbows, hard lungs, clipped ankles. He played like he wanted to hurt. And on that day, he did. First came the cheap kicks, then the late tackles, and then came the punch. Keegan snapped. So did Bremner. 2 men, fists flying in front of the FA, the crowd, the country. They were both sent off, both banned, both fined. But only one of them felt shame. Keegan walked off the pitch in a rage, tore off his shirt, and hurled it to the ground. I came to play football. He came to fight. That moment changed him. It was the first time Keegan saw the other side of the game, the one where brutality is respected more than brilliance, where violence is strategy, where men like Bremner are applauded for destroying, not creating. He never forgot it. Not the pain, not the disrespect, not the way the FA handed down punishment as if both men were the same. Keegan never looked at Leeds the same way again, and he never looked at Billy Bremner again, without fire behind his eyes. It wasn't a punch, it wasn't a tackle. It was something worse. It was a whisper in the press, a subtle accusation, a shadow cast on Keegan's credibility. Ferguson knew how to win without touching a ball. He planted doubt like a surgeon. 1995, Newcastle were flying. Fast, beautiful, ruthless. Keegan's team played football that made people believe again. But Ferguson played a different game. He hinted, he needled. He said other teams weren't trying hard enough against Newcastle, said there was bias, weakness, favoritism, and Keegan, the man who wore truth like a badge, couldn't take it. I would love it if we beat them. Love it. It wasn't a quote, it was a collapse, broadcast live. The rage, the crack in his voice, the trembling hands. That moment didn't just live forever, it followed him forever. Ferguson never raised his voice. He never raised a hand. He didn't have to. He bent the room with silence. And when Keegan tried to fight emotion with fire, Ferguson beat him with calm. It wasn't football, it was war. And Keegan lost. But what burned most wasn't the defeat. It was the feeling that someone had got inside his soul and pulled something out of him that he couldn't put back. Newcastle was never just a job to Keegan, it was his revolution. He had taken them from shadows to stadiums bursting with belief, a team that didn't just chase trophies, it played like it had something to prove. But by 2008, something had changed. The club was no longer a dream, it was a transaction. And standing behind the deals, behind the power shifts, was a man who didn't understand football and didn't care to learn. Mike Ashley. He wore the shirt, sat with the fans, smiled for cameras, but in the corridors of power, he was pulling strings that strangled the spirit of the club. Players were signed behind Keegan's back. Transfers forced through as favors to agents. Power removed quietly. And Keegan, the man who once inspired a city, was now being ignored in rooms where his name had built the walls. I was sick of being treated like dirt. He walked. Not because he failed, but because he refused to be a puppet in a club he once led with pride. He sued. He won. But no court ruling could undo the damage. Mike Ashley didn't just cost Newcastle a manager. He cost them the soul of what they were becoming. And for Keegan, that wasn't business. That was betrayal. The kind you don't recover from. The kind that doesn't get forgiven. Some enemies face you. Dennis Wise didn't. He was handed a title. Executive Director of Football. A new name for an old job, control. But control doesn't need a whistle. It moves through meetings Keegan wasn't invited to. It speaks in deals made without the manager's voice. It signs players the coach has never seen. Zisco. Ignacio Gonzalez. Both brought in without approval. One of them as a favor to agents. The other barely fit to wear the shirt. Keegan saw the game changing, not on the pitch, but in the corridors. And in those corridors, Wise moved quietly. He was the knife beneath the smile. He didn't argue, he didn't challenge, he simply erased the manager's authority piece by piece. Keegan tried to fight it, tried to call it out, but by then it was already too late. It became clear the manager had no say. He wasn't exaggerating, he was warning. Football was becoming something else. And Wise was the face of that shift. A game run by people who didn't need to care what it felt like to bleed for a badge. Keegan left because of what Wise represented. Silence where there should have been honesty. Business where there should have been belief. And the worst part? The betrayal didn't come from a rival. It came from a man inside the walls. This one wasn't about fists, or transfers, or lawyers. It was about trust, and a man who forgot what it meant. Lawrie McMenemy had known Keegan for years. They worked together, shared the pitch, shared ambitions. But when the pressure came, when words carried more weight than results, McMenemy chose the microphone. He accused Keegan's team of cheating, publicly, questioned their character, their integrity, their effort, and Keegan, who built every team on belief, on honesty, on discipline, took it personally. When a man questions your player's integrity, you don't forgive that. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't front-page news. It wasn't meant to last. But Keegan remembered. He always remembered. Because to him, the line wasn't crossed by an enemy, but by someone who should have known better. There are some stories that don't make the papers. No cameras, no interviews, just a man. Walking out of a stadium, broken. After a 1-0 loss to Germany in 2000, Keegan resigned from the England job, not in a boardroom, not with a press release. In a toilet cubicle at Wembley. That wasn't just embarrassment, that was collapse. He felt the pressure, but he also felt the silence. The kind that creeps in when people around you stop believing, when the ones above you start planning your exit, before you've left the room. At Newcastle, things were worse. They didn't just doubt him, they moved without him. I was sick of being treated like dirt. Deals made behind his back, decisions sealed without his knowledge, and every time he raised a voice, someone else whispered louder. There were rumors that Ashley was already lining up replacements, that Dennis Wise had more control than the manager, that players were arriving not for football, but for favors. He later wrote, "They rode roughshod over me." And maybe that's what broke him. Not a match, not a defeat, but the slow, quiet way respect was erased. The public saw the smile. But inside, something had changed. And the Keegan who left Newcastle for the last time wasn't the man who built it. He had believed the game still had rules. But by the end, even he had to admit, those rules no longer applied. You don't remember Kevin Keegan for tactics. You remember him because he felt everything. He didn't believe in fear, he believed in loyalty, he believed in fairness, and he believed that when you gave your word, you stood by it. But in a game that was changing, men like him were treated as relics. He fought on the pitch, he fought in press rooms, he fought in courtrooms. And in the end, he walked away from more jobs than he was ever sacked from. Not because he failed, but because he refused to become what they wanted. Those 5 men left scars. Bremner made it violent. Ferguson made it psychological. Ashley made it corporate. Wise made it silent. And McMenemy made it personal. They didn't just cross him, they redefined him. And maybe that's the story no one told properly. That Kevin Keegan wasn't destroyed by football. He was destroyed by the people who stopped loving it the way he still did. Because when others calculated their next move, Keegan still felt everything. And that's what made him vulnerable. But also unforgettable. He didn't want power, he wanted purpose. And when purpose disappeared, he left. But he didn't forget. Not the punches, not the whispers, not the meetings behind his back. Not the nights where silence told him everything he needed to know. He didn't forgive them, he didn't have to. Because the truth outlives them all. And if you still believe that loyalty isn't weakness, that principle isn't outdated, and that a man who stands alone can still be right, subscribe. Because Kevin Keegan didn't fade away. He walked away, with fire still in his chest.